The morning of my divorce hearing, my husband walked into the courtroom wearing the same smug smile he'd worn ever since he left me for his younger girlfriend. He leaned over and whispered, "After today, you'll never touch another dollar of mine." His girlfriend laughed loud enough for everyone to hear and added, "She'll be lucky if she can even pay her lawyer." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply handed my sealed letter to the judge before the hearing began. 5 minutes later, the judge stopped the proceedings, read the second page twice, then slowly smiled. That's when everything changed. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 41 years old. If you'd asked me a year ago what the biggest mistake of my life would be, I would have said marrying too young or trusting people too easily. I never would have guessed that my greatest mistake was believing the man I'd loved for nearly 18 years would still recognize loyalty when everything else in his life became more valuable. When Daniel and I married, we had almost nothing. We rented a tiny apartment above an old bakery, counted every dollar before grocery shopping, and celebrated anniversaries with homemade dinners because restaurant meals were a luxury. None of it mattered. We believed we were building a future together. I worked as a high school English teacher. Daniel dreamed of owning his own financial consulting firm. While he spent long nights chasing clients and earning certifications, I quietly kept our life together. I covered bills whenever business slowed down, handled the house, encouraged him after every setback, and celebrated every small victory as if it were my own. Eventually, his company exploded. Within 10 years, Daniel wasn't just successful, he was wealthy. The modest sedan became imported sports cars. Weekend trips became luxury vacations. Our neighborhood became a gated community where every driveway held a different luxury SUV. Somewhere along the way, the man I married disappeared. He stopped asking about my day. Every conversation became about investments, clients, networking dinners, or people important enough to advance his reputation. When I suggested spending a quiet weekend together, he always had another meeting or another business trip. Then came Vanessa. She was 29, polished, ambitious, and worked as the firm's marketing director. Daniel insisted she was simply brilliant at her job. He laughed whenever friends teased him about spending so much time with her. I laughed too. Looking back, I realized I wasn't laughing because I believed him. I was laughing because I didn't want to believe my instincts. 3 months later, he asked for a divorce. No counseling, no discussion, no explanation beyond the familiar phrase, "We've simply grown apart." Within 2 weeks, Vanessa had moved into the penthouse Daniel claimed he'd rented for business convenience. What hurt even more wasn't losing my husband. It was discovering how carefully he'd planned everything. Bank accounts had quietly changed. Properties had been transferred. Investments had been moved. Every financial decision had been preparing for this moment while I still believed we were planning our 20th anniversary. Even my attorney warned me. "Emily," she said gently, "based on these records, Daniel believes this divorce will be over in a single hearing." I simply nodded, because there was one thing no one else knew. The night before court, I had written one letter. The next morning, as Daniel smirked across the courtroom, I quietly slid that sealed envelope onto the judge's desk. The courtroom felt strangely quiet despite being full. My attorney whispered one last time, "Whatever happens, stay calm." I gave her a small nod. Across the aisle, Daniel looked completely relaxed. His custom-tailored suit probably cost more than my monthly paycheck. Vanessa sat behind him wearing an expensive cream-colored dress, smiling like she'd already won. Daniel caught my eye and leaned toward his attorney before speaking just loudly enough for me to hear. "I hope she's ready to accept reality." Vanessa chuckled. "She'll be lucky if she leaves with enough money to buy another car." I kept my eyes forward. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The proceedings began exactly the way Daniel expected. His attorney confidently presented stacks of financial records, investment statements, property deeds, and company ownership documents. Each page seemed to tell the same story. Daniel owned nearly everything. His lawyer spoke with complete confidence. My client built these assets through his own business ventures. Mrs. Carter contributed very little financially, and we believe the proposed settlement is both generous and fair. Every sentence sounded like another nail sealing my future. My attorney challenged several claims, but Daniel's team appeared prepared for every argument. Then the judge paused. He looked toward the sealed envelope resting beside his files. "I've received a personal letter submitted by Mrs. Carter this morning." Daniel actually laughed. "Your Honor," he said, shaking his head, "I'm sure it's simply an emotional appeal. My wife has always preferred feelings over facts." A few quiet laughs echoed from Daniel's side. The judge ignored them. He carefully opened the envelope. The room became silent except for the soft sound of paper unfolding. He read the first page without changing expression. Then he reached the second. His eyebrows lifted. He read several lines again, this time much slower. Without saying a word, he reached for one of the financial exhibits already filed with the court. He compared it to the letter. Then another document. Then another. My attorney glanced at me with visible confusion. Daniel's lawyer shifted uneasily in his chair. The judge finally looked up. "Mr. Carter," he asked calmly, "did you personally review every financial disclosure submitted to this court?" Daniel smiled confidently. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you're stating under oath that every asset listed here is complete and accurate?" "Absolutely." The judge nodded once, then asked another question. "Have you ever transferred assets into another person's name within the past 2 years?" Daniel hesitated, only for a second. "No." The judge lowered his eyes to my letter once more. He slowly removed a highlighted page clipped to the back. The confidence on Daniel's face began to fade. Even Vanessa stopped smiling. For the first time that morning, the courtroom no longer felt predictable. The judge closed the letter, folded his hands, looked directly at Daniel, and said quietly, "Mr. Carter, I believe you've just made a very serious mistake." No one spoke. Even the courtroom clerk had stopped typing. The judge placed my letter beside the stack of financial disclosures and adjusted his glasses before looking directly at Daniel. "Mrs. Carter's letter doesn't introduce new evidence," he said calmly. "It simply directed the court's attention to inconsistencies already contained within your own filings." Daniel frowned. "I don't understand." "I believe you do." The judge held up 2 documents. 3 properties appear here under your financial history, yet only one appears in your disclosure statement. These ownership transfers occurred less than 18 months before these proceedings. Daniel's attorney quickly flipped through his binder. His expression changed instantly. "Your Honor, if I may have a moment with my client." "You may." The attorney leaned toward Daniel, whispering urgently. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. Daniel's confident smile had completely disappeared. Vanessa looked from him to his lawyer, her face growing paler by the second. The judge continued. "There are also investment transfers, undisclosed accounts, and several transactions requiring further explanation before this court can determine an equitable division of marital assets." The courtroom was silent. Daniel finally stood. "There has to be some misunderstanding." The judge shook his head. "That's exactly what this financial review will determine." He ordered an independent forensic accountant to examine every account, property transfer, and investment connected to the marriage before issuing a final ruling. For the first time since walking into that courtroom, Daniel looked afraid. Outside the courthouse, he hurried after me. "Emily, wait." I turned around. His voice was no longer arrogant. It was desperate. "We can work this out. We don't have to keep fighting." I looked at him for several seconds. "You stopped fighting for this marriage long before today. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "No," I answered quietly. "It happened exactly the way your choices led it." Months later, the financial review uncovered assets Daniel had failed to disclose and confirmed that several transfers had been made shortly before filing for divorce. The court adjusted the settlement accordingly, ensuring every marital asset was fairly considered under the law. I didn't celebrate. Winning wasn't about money. It was about finally being heard. As I walked out of the courthouse after the final hearing, I carried nothing except my handbag and a quiet sense of peace. Daniel had entered believing arrogance would guarantee victory. But in the end, one truthful letter accomplished what months of insults never could. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking away defeated. I was simply walking toward a better life.